Good day, physicians. So, welcome to a new lesson on Chapter 3. We are still discussing Chapter 3, and just to recap, we have already addressed the first two parts or the first few parts of Chapter 3, such as research design, sampling technique, and then we also are able to talk about research instruments. So remember that our research is qualitative, therefore, the research instrument that we are having is interview. So this lesson will be focusing on how are we going to construct interview questions as well as discussing the last sections of chapter 3. So for this session, you will be able to plan data collection and analysis procedure, construct interview questions, collect data using observation and interviews, but again, in our case, it's only interview. And then you should be able to present written research methodology. So obviously, we'll be using a structured interview, and based on our discussion last time, when we say structured interview, you as a researcher, you have constructed a predetermined set of questions. So you will be preparing the questions beforehand for the respondents. Now you have to make sure that the interview questions that you will be constructing are anchored or aligned to the research questions that you wrote in your chapter 1. And also please remember that since qualitative research aims to gather people's thoughts and experiences, um, we should be able to construct questions that will generate those experiences, thoughts, and beliefs. And these questions are what we call open-ended questions. And we already know this even before. Open-ended questions, these are questions that allow our respondents to freely express their thoughts, beliefs, and experiences regarding the topic at hand. So again, when we construct interview questions, um, it should be open-ended. And anyway, this mini activity on constructing interview questions, we will do this during our synchronous class on Wednesday for STEM 11 and AD 11, and then Thursday for Textbook 11. Okay, so please follow our schedule for the Zoom class. Okay. Now, the last two sections of your chapter 3 are called data gathering procedure and data analysis. So once we have already identified what research design is appropriate to our research, what sampling technique is appropriate to our research, what research instrument is appropriate to our research, we also have to identify or we also have to list down the step-by-step procedure of gathering and collecting the data. At the same time, the way of or the manner by which we will analyze the data that we collected. And that is also part of chapter 3. So I'll be showing you some sample paragraphs on how to construct these sections of chapter 3 so that you would have an idea how to construct and what to include in these particular sections. Okay, now when we say data gathering procedure, this section of chapter 3 actually discusses the step-by-step procedure. When we say step-by-step procedure, it has to be in sequence. So from the moment you prepare the interview questions until you finish interviewing your respondents. That is how data gathering procedure um, is covered. Okay. This section should also indicate who your respondents are, where are they located, where and when will the interview take place, and what will you do next after you collect the data from the interview. Okay, so that is how, these are the things that you need to include in this particular section. Okay, let's have an example. So here, in this example, again, remember that this section talks about the step-by-step procedure. Okay, so in this particular example, the first sentence actually refers to the step one. Okay, the researchers prepared a letter of consent to be signed by the research advisor and the senior high school principal of Pateras Catholic School to acknowledge them before conducting an interview. Of course, this example was written during the face-to-face classes. Okay, so for the sake of familiarity, um, before we conduct any type of data collection, before we conduct any interview or survey, we have to have a prepared letter of consent to be signed by me and to be signed by the principal. This is how we do it during the face-to-face classes. But now, since we are having online classes, I'll be giving a sample what you call this, statement of consent na lang. So instead of letter, I'll be providing a template or a format of a statement of consent for your respondents. Okay, so that will be your step one, and that will be the first statement or the first sentence in this section. Okay, the moment you prepare the statement of consent. Then the researchers provide a set of interview questions based on their research questions. Once the letter of consent is signed and the interview questions are approved, only then have the researchers conducted the interview. Okay? So, medyo step by step talaga siya. Ipe-prepare mo muna yung consent and then ipe-prepare mo yung interview questions before you can actually conduct the interview proper. Okay? Now, in this step, let's look at the example. In this step, the researchers went to the participant settings, specifically in the Pateras Catholic School Senior High School, to gather data from their respondents through interview method. In the actual interview, the respondents were informed of the researcher's purpose. So, nakalagay din to sa statement of consent na ibibigay ko sa inyo. You have to inform your respondents about why you're conducting such interview. It's important to inform our respondents why are we having this kind of data collection and what is this for, ganyan. They have to be informed about these things. Aside from this, it is the researcher's task to be ethical and ask permission from their respondents before using a voice recorder. Kasi nga face-to-face setup pa to. But for you, you can just send the questions to your respondents via Messenger or via Google Form if you like, as long as you send first the statement of consent that I'll be sending you. The moment the researchers have collected the respondents' experience, this is the time for them to analyze the data they have collected from the respondents. So, ganyan lang yung data gathering procedure na section. The first step would be, prepare the statement of consent and prepare the questions. And the last step or the last sentence of this paragraph should be about what will you do next after you collected the data from your respondents. Of course, you will analyze. So, yun lang yung i-indicate nyo sa last sentence as the last step. Let's have another example. Okay. This one is another example. Now, I won't be reading the entire example, but let's try to distinguish the common details between example number one a while ago and this one. So what are the common details that they have included? Number one is there is actually a step-by-step procedure. So, okay, so pag binasa mo yung section na ito, makikita mo that the sentences are arranged in sequence kasi nga step by step siya. Paano ka nag-gather ng data? Of course, nagpadala ka muna ng consent letter, gumawa ka ng interview questions before you can actually conduct the interview, and then what happens next during the interview, what happens after the interview, what happens after you collected the data from the interview. So yun yung idea ng data gathering procedure na section. Okay? It narrates the step-by-step procedure. Also, some common details between the two examples, binanggit nila yung target respondents nila and kung taga saan yung respondents nila. Okay? Another common detail is yung interview procedure. Okay, so during the interview, ano ba yung mga dapat nating gawin or i-execute. Una, inform natin yung respondents natin that we are conducting a research about this and why are we doing this. Ganyan. And then, you also have to maybe, um, after you inform them of your purpose, that's the time you can actually send the questions and then maybe give them instructions how to answer the questions, ganyan, or how long are you going to wait for them to update you about their answers, so ganon. Post-interview procedure is also one common detail in the two examples. Pag sinabi natin post-interview procedure, ano na yung magagawin mo after mong makollect yung data sa kanila, sa respondents mo. So, i-indicate mo lang sa last sentence ng paragraph na to, ng section na to, is that you as a researcher will be analyzing, interpreting, making meaning of the data that you got from your respondents. That's it. Now, we proceed to the last section of chapter 3, which is data analysis. So, kanina, data gathering procedure, step-by-step procedure lang yon. Dito, sa last part ng chapter 3, which is data analysis, paano mo i-analyze yung mga sagot ng respondents mo. Okay, so dito mo i-indicate how are you going to go about the data that you collected during the interview. Okay, now, these are the ways we can perform data analysis if our research is qualitative research. Number one, we can compare and contrast the answers of your respondents for each question. Okay. Also, you can base your data analysis by citing related literature from your RRL, which is chapter 2, if the data you collected from the interview have similar findings with the related literature you have used in chapter 2. So it is important that we are able to cite similar findings from our RRL kasi medyo mabigat yun eh. Kung yung data na nakuha mo sa respondents mo yield the same findings dun sa mga RRL sources na sinite mo during your chapter 2, then that will be really a great, that will be a, a better and substantial detail of your research na yung kinalabasan ng data mo also has similarities sa mga findings na ginamit mo sa RRL. That will be really a substantial part of your research. Another way of doing data analysis is determining patterns and themes from your data that you collected from the interviews. Okay, so narinig na naman natin yung patterns and themes. Di ba ginawa na natin yan before sa RRL natin? out of the articles, out of the related studies that you collected from the internet, you identified patterns and themes, di ba? So, ganito rin yung gagawin natin sa mga sagot na nakolekta natin sa respondents natin. We try to identify patterns and themes from their answers. Okay? Just make sure that the patterns and themes are related the um, to the research questions that you constructed. Kasi we try to achieve consistency from chapter 1 up to the end of your research. So, kailangan yung mga patterns and themes na magagawa natin should be anchored to the research questions as well. So let's try to have an example paragraph of this section of chapter 3. So again, this section only indicates how are you going to analyze the data that you collect. Wala pa dito yung actual analysis ng data kasi chapter 4 pa yon. Dito sa data analysis section ng chapter 3, i-indicate mo lang kung paano mo i-analyze yung data na nakuha mo from your interview. Okay, so are you going to compare and contrast their answers? Are you going to relate the findings that you have from the findings you have in your RRL? Or are you going to identify patterns and themes from the answers of your respondents? So yun lang yung mga guide questions na pwede nating sundan once we construct this particular section of chapter 3. Okay, so let me read this example. Data analysis. Once the researchers gathered the answers of the respondents, they used narrative analysis to examine the experiences shared by the respondents. Narrative analysis focuses on interpreting the experience from individuals, so it will be easy to summarize the answers through this analysis. The researchers compared all the data that they got from the respondents. It is convenient for the researchers to generalize the responses from them if the data have the same thought. In line with this, the researchers analyzed the response of the respondents if it is relevant to the study. If the response is reasonable and can satisfy the interview questions, then it effectively contributed to the overall study. So dito sa paragraph na to, what they did is narrative analysis. They also compared the answers from their respondents, and they also try to evaluate which answers from the respondents are relevant or connected to the study. So that is also a vital step in data analysis. Okay, syempre hindi naman lahat ng sagot ng respondents pwede nating gamitin, or we also try to critically evaluate which parts of their responses or which parts of their answers are relevant to your study. So may ganun ding step that you can do once you analyze the data. Let's have another example. So, ayan, they put the answers of their responses in a table para daw mas organized and mas ma-identify nila. The researchers compare the data to the RRL to determine whether the answers have a pattern or not. So, just like what I said a while ago, pwede nyo i-compare yung nakuha nyong data dun sa findings na nakuha nyo sa RRL. This sample also compared and contrasted the data that they gathered. That's nice. Okay. So very short lang itong section ng chapter 3 na to. You're just going to indicate how are you going to analyze the data that you will collect from the interview. Other examples. So again, compare and contrasting, finding commonalities and differences, parang ganon. And they also use their RRL to find similarities. Another example, ayan. So again, similarities and differences of the respondents' answers. Okay, so compare and contrasting talaga. And yun nga, yung importance nung pag-connect nung RRL sa sarili mong findings sa interview mo. So that will also be, that is something that I would expect to see or to read here in this section of chapter 3. Okay, so for your worksheet number 2, if you can still remember worksheet 1, yun yung kalahati ng chapter 3, right? Now, yung last half, the second half of chapter 3 will be this one, data gathering procedure and data analysis. So here are the some guide questions or some guidelines how to construct data gathering procedure. And you can also go back to the examples a while ago, but this is a general guideline. In data gathering procedure, you have to discuss step by step, okay, the procedures that you will undertake in, okay, such as preparing the consent, the statement of consent, the constructing the interview questions, going into participant setting, and conducting interviews. So most probably, dahil online ang setup natin ngayon, I think the most accessible communication we can use will be Messenger or kung email, kung kaya nyo. Pero I think most accessible talaga yung Messenger. So if you really want to conduct virtual tele-interview, pwede naman via Zoom or any other platform that you like. Pero if I may suggest, you can really you can really communicate with your target respondents via Messenger kasi that's something that is most accessible nowadays. The data analysis, what you will be doing here is what the basic guide question for this section will be how will you analyze the data that you will collect from the interview? Will you be comparing and contrasting the answers of your respondents? Will you identify patterns and themes among their answers? Will you be using your RL to find similarities and differences from the data that you got from the interview? So these are the things that you can ask yourself when you construct this section of chapter 3. Okay? And submission of worksheet number 2 will be until Saturday. And please access the Genio for the file. And the submission is still via MS Teams. Okay, so I think that will be all for this discussion. Please follow the Wednesday schedule again for the Zoom class for STEM and AD, and then Thursday schedule for Tech Vault. Okay, so that's it for this discussion. Thank you so much.